Welcome to the Coaching Podcast with your hosts Emma Doyle and Simon Blair, coach for success in sport and business.
G'day everybody and welcome to this special Australian Open episode on the Coaching Podcast. And I just wanted to mention how exciting the weekend of tennis was. First and foremost, I wanted to give a big shout out to my good friend Betty Sokolowski, who's been working for many years with a player called Jamie Foulis. I also had the pleasure of working with Jamie for around a year and a half on her mindset. And it was just so great to see her and Jason Kubler break through all the way to the final of the mixed doubles. So being a Grand Slam finalist is such an amazing achievement and can quite often kickstart careers. Doing well in doubles then can really help your singles game. We saw that with the likes of Samantha Stosur and certainly other players that feeling those grand final feelings and the nerves and the tension and can really help your singles game. So I love that about doubles. So just a big shout out, congrats. I was really proud of Jamie and her team, and Jason certainly had a number of his fair share of injuries over the years. So great to see them make the final. When I was younger, there's no doubt I used to hit against the wall thinking I was Yvonne Goolagong-Cawley and pretending, sort of self-commentating on my own shots. And I hope that Ash Barty does exactly that for young players, hitting against the wall, pretending they're Ash Barty, using her all-court game and the variety of skills that we saw was so awesome in the final against Danielle Collins. And you'll hear in this episode, again, the US college pathway is such an awesome way to give yourself a stepping stone onto the tour. So huge believer in the US college pathway instead of turning pro straight away. So congrats to Ash Barty. It's been a long time coming that we've had a Women's Australian Open champion on home soil. So that was awesome. And an All-Australian men's doubles final as well. And of course, I couldn't think of a more deserving champion than Rafael Nadal. He really did show us the true meaning of humility, work ethic, and respect. Character traits that tennis reveals, and I think that's why I enjoyed the weekend of tennis so much. Just to see these traits in the likes of champions like Ash Barty and Rafael Nadal and Jamie Foulis. So congrats to these people who understand what it really means to be a great human and a great tennis player. It was a wonderful weekend of tennis and a great fortnight. So just wanted to mention that to kickstart this episode. And what I love about Mike, he contacted me on Instagram, and he is definitely what I would consider a young game changer. We love hearing from young coaches and the perspective of young coaches. Mike's had a great career as a hitting partner, so he provides some unique perspective from that angle with the likes of Federer and Djokovic and Berrettini, as he's started his coaching career at the Soto Tennis Academy in Spain. So we hope you enjoy this episode.
G'day everybody and welcome to the Coaching Podcast. My name's Emma Doyle. I'm here with Michael Digby. Did I say that right? Digby?
Yes, perfect.
Oh, there
perfect.
you go.
Mike's good.
I was going to put on my British accent, but then I realised it has been a little while since I've been back to the gorgeous UK, of course. Now you live in Spain, but we'll get to all that later. Listen, Mike, thanks for being on the show. We're going to jump straight into it. You are in Melbourne. I am a little jealous. I am. There's no denying it's this beautiful summer time of year in January. The first question is the Vegemite question. You either love it, you strongly dislike it, or you haven't tried it. If you haven't tried it, I'm going to kill you because you're right in Melbourne. What's your take?
I have. I have tried it, and I actually tried it quite a few years ago, because played college tennis, and I had a girl that was an Aussie that came over, and she used to get loads of it shipped over, and obviously I'm a big Marmite fan, so we had a big old debacle around, which one's nicer, and I've got to say I quite like it.
Nice.
I do quite like it. I don't know if it tops Marmite, the old British Marmite, but I'll sing its praises every now and again.
Oh, well, we don't get too many people that answer that way, so now I'm very impressed. What college did you play at?
I played at Davenport University. It's Division II school up in Michigan. So a little bit different weather to Melbourne in Spain, that's to say the least.
Yeah, absolutely. I love, so how many options there are in college tennis, D1, D2, D3, NAIA. I've learned so much about it. My partner does US college scholarships for athletes around the world. So I've had a whole new appreciation for all the different levels. So if anyone's out there listening, looking for a US college scholarship, there's so many awesome opportunities, even in freezing 100%. Cold Michigan. So,
I mean,
I'm sure you had a great time.
There's some great schools. I mean, there's so many opportunities. I was very lucky to play at a good Division II school, and I think a lot of people think that there's this perception around, like if you don't go Division 1, the level's really poor, and when actually there's a lot of really, really good players that go to high-end Division 2 because maybe the scholarship's a little bit more generous, I recommend it to anyone.
Yeah, right there with you. All right, so because you said you were a fan of Vegemite, therefore the follow-up question is we start with your best coaching moment.
Yeah, so I'm very grateful that I've had quite a lot of involvement at the higher end of the game as a hitting partner as well. So whether that's more coaching, I'm not sure, but I think one of the best moments for me, I guess, as more of a hitter, I guess, than a coach, was when I first remember when I went to Wimbledon, and I was there, and one of my first gigs was actually hitting with Djokovic, which is a bit of the in topic at the moment for maybe different reasons. Yeah, and I always remember one of my big lessons over the last 3-4 years doing that, and kind of acquiring a coaching role with some top juniors now, and being involved with those top players, was always trying to look to shadow the coaches that were doing it. And I had a really good chance to spend some time with Marian Vida, who's coaching Djokovic. And I think one of my big takeaways and one of the best moments for me is this, just keeping things really simple. I think so many coaches, and I'm guilty of doing it as well, is overcomplicating, using this technical vocab, or just trying to make things too complicated, when in reality tennis is a really simple sport. And if we can keep it as simple as possible and just use simple vocab, then often these players, it just sticks. And it's amazing how I find one common trait with really, really good coaches at all levels, not just at the pro level, at junior level, is just really simple methods, simple instructions. And I think one of the best moments for me is when I remember we were doing like a cross-court drill, really basic drill with Novak, and Mariam said something on the line for it, right, whenever you get this kind of ball, just go down the line. Whenever you get this kind of ball, just open up the court. And it was a really simple cue, really simple. And you think, well, this is world number one. He'd probably won 17, 18 Grand Slams at the time. He'd be thinking he'd be doing really technical, really difficult stuff, when actually it was really simple. And I remember Novak responding, and he was like, this is great. Like, this is exactly what I needed. So I think from more of a bystander point of view, watching in from me doing a lot of the hitting, and then allowing myself to learn from that kind of environment, that was probably one of my best moments from in a coaching environment. Maybe not me as a coach personally, but because I'm still very young, but it was just really interesting to hear those kind of coaches talk in that way.
Nick Bollettieri said that. I said, what's your best piece of advice on the podcast? And he said, keep it simple.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%.
So there's a lot of great coaches out there that subscribe to that philosophy. A great lesson for all of us. What about on the flip side? Can you think, either as a player, hitter, coach, what's your worst coaching moment, and what were maybe some of the lessons?
I remember, like I said, I'm now at the Soto Tennis Academy down in Soto Grande in Spain. And I think I've always wanted to try and test myself, and as a young coach with some of the better players, and see where I fit in that environment. And I remember One player, he was around 400 in the world ATP, and he did really well at Wimbledon one year in the doubles, and great guy, really good player. And one of the coaches there said, look, I'd like you to start doing a few weeks with him. And I think as a young coach, maybe coming across a bit too eager, and I think one of the biggest lessons that I learned is I was too much. I said too many things. I was too eager. I was almost like being a little bit of a pest. And I think one of the biggest moments, and it hit me hard when that coach said to me, oh, he's not liking it, it's too much, it's this, it's that. And you kind of think, oh, okay. And you look back and you reflect and you think, yeah, it was crazy. It was way too much there. I didn't almost cater to what he wanted. And I think one of the great thing about it is he was absolutely honest with me about it, and I take feedback pretty well. We had to sit down, we had a chat, and it was all fine. But I think that was a big lesson learned for me to, again, I guess it kind of relays with the story I told previous, was keeping it simple. There's no need to do anything drastic. But that was definitely up there for probably one of the difficult moments from my very young coaching career. Is
the third top response in our global research in what makes a great coach is actually someone who listens. So when we really listen to our student, put our student in the center, that is something that sings to my coaching philosophy, and great to hear. That's a great lesson. Everyone can always learn from that. Thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that one. The next one is the sliding doors question.
I remember it was November 2019. And I'd just finished being a hitting partner at the ATP finals in London. And I did quite a lot with Federer, Medvedev, and Tsitsipas. And I always kind of thought, 2020, great. Like, it's going to be, and I want to continue doing the hitting partner stuff. And I was really, really enjoying it at the time. And I kind of thought, right, that's what I want to do. And I remember a guy called Matt James, who did a great job with Emma Raducanu when she was younger, up until relatively recently as well. And he said to me, look, like, I've got a really good coaching opportunity for you in Soto Grande in Spain. The director, Dan Kiernan's looking for someone to, kind of travel with the pros in more of a coaching capacity. And I wanted to dismiss it because I was a little bit, my ego took over, wanting to keep working with these top guys with the hitting and everything. And so I kind of thought, oh, you know what, I'll go over, I'll speak to him, I'll see how it is, whatever. And I went over and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And I think then you go a year later, all of a sudden I'm now working with the top junior, traveling with a guy that's 600 in the world ATP in more of a coaching capacity. And I think it could have been very easy for me to just continue with the hitting stuff. But then I think I slowly realized that as much as that's great, and it's a great exposure to the top level of the game, and it taught me a lot, that I'd love to do that in a coaching capacity. And I think the earlier I started that as a coach, then, the more time I can give myself to, gain that valuable experience and try and work my way up the ladder. And I think I often reflect back and think it's amazing how my 2020 could have gone with COVID hitting, with not being able to do anything, compared to actually how it did go. And I was very grateful that I could still coach, and Spain was relatively open. So I think that was, I look back now and I'm sitting here in Melbourne at the Australian Open as a coach, whereas I might not even be in tennis because the hitting partner thing all dried up because of COVID. So,
and it's sometimes just that one person who believes in you and supports you, and he tapped you on your shoulder, and that's an awesome story. In one to a maximum of 3 words, what do you think makes a great coach?
That's a really good question. I think we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. I think a good listener. I really I'm a big believer in that, and I think it's the lessons that I've learned in the last couple of years coaching is, as soon as you let your ego get in the way, then the good listener becomes a bad listener. And I think that's something that I'd say that I'm probably relatively good at, but I've also had to work at it as well. And I think, when you work with some very good players, often, as much as we as coaches want to have our input, it's often their input that then teaches you how to mold the input you need to give. So I think it's a big area where if you can sit back, listen, and gauge how they're feeling, you'll often really get like a true response as to how they're feeling. Whereas if, like we said earlier, if you're constantly a bit too eager and like trying to almost put that input and give that input without them really wanting it, it backfires massively. So I think a really strong listener, someone that can really kind of like take a step back and just go, right, how are they feeling? And I think that leads me on to kind of the next thing, is that my one question that I'll always ask after, whether it's drills, whether it's start of the morning, whether it's at the end of the week, whatever the scenario might be, my big question that I say to players is, how are you feeling? Like, how are you doing? Because we often lose that real human touch and human connection as when we're coaching an athlete, when in reality, like, they're trying to do something, especially, the top juniors and the pros, that is abnormal. It's not normal to be a top 100 tennis player. There's only 100 of them in the world out of the 8 billion people. So constantly asking them how they're feeling and how they're doing is really important, because that can gauge how the day goes, because it might be a player comes into a session and, we don't ask that question. They're feeling really bad, really frustrated, really annoyed about something, and they have a poor session. Whereas if we go, right, how are you feeling? And they go, well, actually, you know what, Mike, I'm not good. I feel really bad, like frustrated, bad night's sleep, had an argument with parents, whatever it might be. So then my response would be, right, well, let's win the first 20 minutes of the session. If we can get a really strong 20 minutes out of this session, your day's already done. Great day. And then what that does is you then go, right, okay, now let's win the next 20 minutes. And now let's win the next. So then all of a sudden you've done a 2-hour practice, which was amazing and really good. When 2 hours previous, you're down in the dumps, you're thinking, oh my God, this is going to be it. So just asking that simple question of how you're feeling, I think, can change the course of someone's day and also someone's week.
Fantastic. And it brought up two things for me. One, when I interviewed Darren Cahill on the podcast, he said that, tennis is a mini 2-game sprint. You sprint for 2 games. I love that. Win 20 minutes. And the other thing that I thought was interesting in what you said, which I love, and I really explored a lot more halfway through my coaching career, was to play around with how are you feeling for, very kinesthetic people, what are you thinking for more auditory, digital people? And then, what is it that you're seeing for this practice today, or tapping into the visual. And then, of course, what are you hearing, as in what's that voice inside your head? What is some of those self comments right now? What are you listening to? So I think that's another good little tip for coaches as well to explore with those.
100%. Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think the player gives you so much information. I think that's one of my big learnings is it's great doing all these session plans and all of that stuff, which is really important as a coach to make sure the planning and the preparation's there 100%. But they will give you so much information through their body language, through what they're saying to you, through how they're thinking, through maybe the mood that they're in. And obviously that takes time to learn, what a player's characteristics are, what traits they have. But if you can really like listen and just almost watch them and just see what they do, it will give you so much information that then can allow you to, ultimately make some key changes, or then really like tap into the things that when they do something well, how do they feel? Like, what body language do they give off? So yeah, it's being a good listener is definitely, and a visual listener as well, like watching them and watching what they do is definitely important for me.
And I remember when we first connected, when we were talking about getting you on the podcast, you spoke about quality over quantity, which is that race of 20 minutes and
100%.
Also with quality over quantity. It reminded me of a story of a player I was working with where we just filmed her between points and looked at her body language between points about not only reading the energy of what she's giving off, we also then showed her footage of other players and the player that she played against, her between point body language, to compare the difference. And I think that just ties beautifully into all those great little gold nuggets that you just gave us. So
100%. We often use at the academy, and also myself now, is take your hat off. see what you see over the other side of the net, because I think there's so many players that become very internalized, where they almost think, oh my God, like it's going really badly. I'm set down. I'm not playing great. I'm not finding the timing on my forehand, my backhand. When actually, if you take your hat off and see down the other end, they're doing the same thing, you'll then slowly realize that, okay, like let's try and play on that a little bit. Let's try and make them feel even more uncomfortable. So I think it goes to the same with players. I think often players, they need to listen to themselves, and also, again, just take the hat off, have a look over the other side of the court, see how they're feeling, because we often forget that tennis, a match is played by two players. What they do, it can often influence what maybe you do, and then also what they're struggling with will influence how you want to play. And
in this chat about ego, for whatever reason, it's the one area of sometimes tennis that concerns me, when the ego just gets in the way, and that's when they can't take the hat off. That's when they can't see down the other end of the court, because it's like, I mean, I worked with a guy on his mindset once, and he said to me, if he loses the first game, like his first service game, he always loses the first set, because his ego about like my service is so big, and like the opinion of his own serve. So anyway, interesting. But our final official question is where we ask you to ask us a question. Is Mike always curious to want to know more about?
I always ask them at some point, and it's a question that I try and get in, is like, if you were to turn back time when they were 23, 24, what two things would they value as a coach? Or what would they tell themselves to do better now that they're 45, 50, 55? Because a lot of the coaches that I've been on court with are much older than me, more experienced. So it's like, what would you tell a 24-year-old you? I think it's my one, because I'm always really curious as to where they were at my age, and almost try and compare, think, right, what's their mindset like? What are they thinking? What would they tell themselves? And a lot of the answers are, there's no rush, take your time, keep things simple, work hard. Those basic answers, but I think they sit so true. I think they really do. It's just keep working hard, keeping yourself grounded. It's very similar, I think, to players at times. I think when you're a young coach, you've got to have the balance between always being eager to learn and being, because you have to be. With a young coach, we're too young to want to say we know everything, because we don't. So being really eager to learn, being positive, being good to be around. I think a lot of players, and I think the women especially, like traveling with younger coaches, because I think you're good to be around, you're positive, you bring good energy.
Let's go now to the Australian Open, which is where you are, my beautiful hometown of Melbourne. I hope you're enjoying the coffee. 100%. Tell me about the atmosphere just there at the moment with the pandemic, and how's security and things like that going?
Well, it's just a strange one, because I've been here around a week or so now. We actually played the W60 event in Traralgon last week, but we're now back in Melbourne. And obviously the big thing right now is obviously the Djokovic thing that seems to be going around. But with the pandemic, the cases are definitely rising. I guess I'm not that surprised, because it's the Aussie summer. I think Australia have opened up the borders a little bit to people coming in and out. So I'm not that surprised, but at the same time, there doesn't seem to be much panic. I think it's just everyone's trying to stay safe. And the big difference between last year and this year is the vaccine has been rolled out a lot. So I think that's protected a lot of players and a lot of coaches like myself. So I think the severity, maybe if you are vaccinated, is a little less. I mean, the one thing for me, the weather is not great. I'm not going to lie. It's very rainy right now. So I'm hoping in the next few days that we start to see some sun. But
the unpredictability of Melbourne. God,
I know.
So what about thoughts on Encore Coaching? Especially, I know you're working with a female junior.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that it happens anyway? Do you think it should be allowed, not allowed? What are your thoughts?
I like it. And the only reason I'm not for it and I'm not against this, but I think if we go down the route of for entertainment value, I think that as a if I was a tennis fan and I'm watching, which I am, I quite like listening into the conversations. I think it gives you a really good insight as to maybe what the coach-player relationship is like, and what they're talking about. Again, just the feedback to each other. I think it brings good entertainment, good value. I think the sport needs to, we always trying to be more innovative, trying to add different bits to the sport, like we've seen with the tiebreak tens, like we've seen with the fast four kind of format. I think it's great from a pure kind of like player point of view, with the combat involved and it being a one-on-one sport. I think maybe then it devalues that a little bit, because then a lot of people's argument would be that, okay, you feel like you're getting help. I personally think that if a 30-second conversation sways a match that much, then I'm not sure whether I'd want to be in the sport. For me, it doesn't sway a match that much to have a conversation for 30 seconds with a player. Don't get me wrong. I think it can change maybe the dynamic of how the player's thinking and what they're looking to do, which I think is good. But I think ultimately, they're potentially on court for 3 hours at times. And I think with a 30-second conversation, it's ultimately their job to try and implement what the coach has said. Yeah, I personally quite like it.
Mm. Yeah, I wonder how it'll play out, the way that tennis is moving towards more entertainment. I think you're right. I think we'll see more of it. But I love the purity of the battle. Definitely. I'm a bit old school like that. I love the problem-solving side 100%. Of it. But, there's no doubt every time I go to the Australian Open, I love going to qualies and last round of qualies. And I mean, it's pretty rife, the coaching that goes on.
Yeah, I think you can't. It's almost one of those ones where you can't really hide from it. I think it happens a lot. And it's, as much as umpires do a brilliant job, it's impossible at times when they're dealing with players, the ball boys, the officials, the coaching boxes.
Ball girls,
it's so hard.
Ball boys and ball girls.
Ball boys and ball girls. Sorry, I apologize. It's, they have such a hard job, so you can see it coming in and happening a few times here and there. But it's a really interesting topic, because I think lots of people have different opinions on it.
Yeah. And you're working with an Aussie girl in the juniors, and you're a young male coach. How do you navigate that pathway of, subtle gender difference between coaching high performance junior girls versus boys?
That's a really good question. There's definite differences as to how you approach coaching, maybe the male, the female, boys, the girls. I think that's very prevalent. But I think with one thing that I found, and again, I think I can take it from being on tour with the high performing women and then the high performing men, is I think that, again, that going down the listener point of view, I think girls want that person that they can trust and build that relationship with. That I think that's a really important part of coaching a female, is being able to listen and for them to feel like that they really trust you. Whereas I would say that the boys are always searching for information. I'd say they're searching for, right, okay, if I hit this forehand here, what are your thoughts on when I look to go down the line? Okay, well, actually, I think that if you get this ball, have a think about going down the line there, for example. Whereas the girls will be more, right, when I've gone cross court, when do I go down the line? They're looking for that security. So it's like, okay, well, when you are this far inside the court, that's when you go down the line. So I guess it's the vocab that you give and how you word things are the big difference between maybe the boys and the girls. So I think if I was coaching, a boy, it would be more information giving and letting them do what they like with that information. Whereas with the girls, I would try and come up with a bit more, so with the girl that I'm coaching here in Australia, it's more like the real patterns, right? If you hit the ball here, I want you to try and go here. So they're really clear. So they have that real security within their game. So I'd say those are the major differences for me from my, limited experience in coaching. And then also as hitting as well, with analysing what coaches are saying. it's the security over then the information.
Mm. And what about our friend Karl Mars? I know you have the opportunity to be on court with him. And what do you think are his 3 best coaching traits?
Oh, it's a great question. So yeah, Carl's now the performance director at Solo Tennis Academy, and has been for a few months now. First and foremost, he's very reassuring, brings that quite calm and positive and confident personality where you almost, when Carl's talking, you want to listen, you want to, engage, you want to kind of, and I think that then is another big reason for me why he's been very, very successful with the women on the Pro Tour. I think it's that reassuring, calm nature about him, but that with the shoulders back, confident as well. That then brings that sense of security, like I was talking about. For me, when I'm very lucky to work very closely with Carl, and that's the one thing that I've taken from him. And I think, when you work with the females, the women, I think it's having that about you, that reassurance, that calm, that kind of nature, I think plays a big part in building that relationship with the females. I think it's really, really important. Brilliant at what he does, as well as being a very, very good tennis coach. He's a brilliant performance director at the academy as well. So very lucky to be able to work alongside him.
Mm. And what was it like being a hitting partner to Roger Federer? I have to ask.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's first and foremost, I was relatively young. Maybe 19, 20, I think. Incredible. Incredible.
Were you nervous?
Yes, I was. I mean, it's a funny story. I remember, so I was with him for 10 days, 2 weeks roughly at the ATP finals. And I remember the first time that we practiced, it was actually at Queen's Club, which is the other side of London compared to the O2. So it's in London, traffic is, a good hour and a half to get over there. And so I remember being driven over there, and he was really late, really, really late, like 45 minutes, an hour late. So that didn't help at all with my nerves. And I'm sitting there on the court, and there's people at the Queen's Club indoors, they're all around the balcony at the top. And I remember just sitting there, and every minute that went by, the more nervous, the more butterflies I'm getting. And I'm thinking, oh my God, it's embarrassing. What if he doesn't show up? And then he obviously walked through the door, and within 5 minutes, because he's the nicest guy ever, those nerves just went away. Just really, he was asking how I was, where do I live, what am I doing, am I playing, am I coaching, all these questions, what football team do I support? And it just felt like it was, just a friend, just having a chat with you, and then obviously, practicing at the same time. So it was, he was one of the few, I would say, that have really settled my nerves very early on. When because we're not talking about one of the greatest tennis players, it's one of the greatest athletes of all time. So it's it's a very nerve-wracking experience, but one that I'll cherish for the rest of my life. It was incredible.
Fantastic. And one thing that I'm really impressed with, Mike, is just the fact that you reached out and said that you listened to the coaching podcast. But I love that you just reached out and then you said, I'd love to be a guest, on the podcast. So what advice would you like to give to the other sort of young game-changing coaches?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I think that's one of the big reasons why I wanted to come on. I think it's really important that young coaches, get a good rep, because I think sometimes they can be criticized at times. There's no rush. And I know it sounds a bit ironic I'm saying that sitting here at 24 years old. I've been very privileged to be able to work alongside some really, really good coaches, both at the academy and then also on tour. And I think the one common thing they say to me as a young coach is there's no rush. You've got plenty of years ahead of you. Keep being really eager to learn. That's one thing that I've been, very hot on, is just learning for all parts of the game, the technical side, tactical, mental, and just really looking to try and hone your knowledge. But then also, knowledge is great, but you've got to be able to build those connections with your athletes to then use the knowledge. And I think that's the one thing that I've really learned is just being myself. Don't try and be someone you're not. I think it's quite easy when you surround yourself with some really, really good coaches to try and almost copy them. Whereas I think it's important you take stuff that they do well and then mold it into your own way that fits your own personality, and use it so it's very organic to you. So I think, being eager to learn, no rush, and just trying to, be as organic as possible as a young coach is really important.
Wise words. And I think no matter what age you are, eager to learn, it's, the minute that you stop learning is the minute you should stop coaching.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. And finally, if I could just squeeze out one last question, would just be triggered one about social media. How do you help your players navigate the very challenging world of sharing, a story, or they want to post what they're doing on court versus dedicated, that 20-minute focused quality versus, how much do you want to take the selfie? And I don't know. I thought that'd be a good question for your age bracket. I don't know the answer.
It's a great question. I think a little bit of a story on that. I think we have a podcast as well at the Academy called Control the Controllables. And we interviewed Jez Green, who was Andy Murray's fitness coach, who at the time was working with Zverev. And he said one of the biggest differences between working with Murray, who was, he worked with him for a number of years, from that generation compared to Zverev, who's my generation, was you almost have to change the way you coach in a way, because Zverev could be up till 2, 3 a.m. on his phone playing video games, whereas Andy would be in bed by 10, 11, because in that generation, it just wasn't really, when he was younger, it wasn't really a thing. So it's challenging for me personally, because I'm from that generation being a coach, but also for me to manage that with my athletes. So I think in regards to managing it with my athletes, I try and say to them, right, once the practice is finished, the match is finished, there's no phone until you've stretched, you've debriefed with me or the coach you're with, and you're in a headspace to then switch off and then kind of go into your off-court life, and then, okay, cool, you can look at your phone, whatever. For me, again, I think it's important to not be on my phone on the court at any point. Even if I want to film, okay, I'll ask, look, I'm going to film something now. The athlete, if they say they're okay with that, that's fine. So just trying to kind of not rely on the phone, which is really hard nowadays because technology is now a big part in the tennis world. It's huge. It's massive. We say that as we do a podcast. So it's a big part of actually players' development. I've got a good friend called Mike James, who's the analyst on tour, and if it wasn't for technology, his job would be really hard. So I think, the phone, laptops, all of that stuff, I think it's just about managing it day to day and making sure that myself and, the players get some downtime and some time to do that, because that's part of life nowadays, but then not allow it to take over would be my big thing.
And almost, I like the concept of sort of treating it like a hobby. Social media time now, but you have to. I mean, even some people might cringe me saying that, but I think if you don't embrace it, then you have to 100%. find a way to work with it. Wise 100%. Words from a very young coach who's coming up through the ranks. We can't wait to follow your career, and really loved everything that you had to say. And thank you so much for reaching out. And please give Melbourne a big hug for me. I'm sure it'll warm up. Believe in it. 4 seasons in one day. It's a true story. And all the best for the Aussie Open to you and your players.
Thank you so much for having me on. It was great.
And today's episode on the Coaching Podcast was sponsored by Transition Coach for Athletes, helping student athletes from all over the world find US college scholarships. You heard on the Coaching Podcast today that the US college pathway is an excellent stepping stone to playing on the tour. For more information, check out www.transitioncoach4athletes.com. That's the number 4.
The Coaching Podcast was brought to you by Emma Doyle and Simon Blair.